when you want to do that. That way people can come and watch this after the fact. In order to fully participate, you want to familiarize yourself with your Zoom screen. There's a chat bubble. On my screen, it's at the bottom. And if you have a question that you can think of, just pop it in the chat box, and we'll ask all those in the course of the program. We will have a presentation today from Steve Wilson of City Wine Market, and Kathy will officially introduce him. And then after we've answered all the questions in the chat box, then we'll go ahead and take questions from you just live in case something comes to your mind. So kind of wave your arms or whatever, and we'll unmute you so you can talk, and that way we won't talk over each other. The other buttons you want to know about are up in the upper right corner where it says view. There's gallery view, which allows you to see everybody here. And then there's speaker view that allows you just to see the person speaking, and then puts the crowd into smaller little boxes. So you can choose which is best for you. It's maybe for during the program, it might be better just to have the speaker view on so you get the optimal view of things. So I'm delighted to introduce today's facilitator. Kathy Hamilton is a former Journal World and Channel 6 reporter here in Lawrence. And I will share one of my favorite stories with Kathy, is that a couple of years ago, she entered a contest with Food and Wine magazine. They had a contest on their Facebook page. And in her essay, she compared herself and her husband to bottles of wine. Rex was described as oaky, which I love. And they won, and they got an all-expense paid trip to Italy for a cruise. And while they're there, they were on their hotel balcony and looked out and spied a guy who looked like Rick Steves down below going into a restaurant. So of course, a typical Kathy and Rex Hamilton fashion, they went after him and met Rick Steves and got to meet him and chatted him up. So that is kind of gives you a little glimpse into the life of the illustrious Kathy Hamilton. So she currently serves as the Retirement Boot Camp Drill Sergeant. So please help me welcome Kathy.
Thank you, Kathleen. Yeah, that was quite a trip. We got very lucky on that. So we're really glad to see you all. This is something we're going to try as a series for Retirement Boot Camp, Wine Around the World. So every month we will be talking about a different region where wine is produced. Our first guest has graciously decided to lead us in a tasting, sort of an educational wine tasting tonight. Steve Wilson is co-owner of City Wine Market, now in their 11th year of doing business at 6th and Wakarusa. Formerly, he owned Prairie Fire, which some of you might remember. It was an upscale restaurant in downtown Lawrence. Some years ago now, a long time ago. And he was a wine educator and consultant for Wines by Jennifer in Parkville, Missouri, and Cellar Rat.
Yeah.
And now if I were writing about Steve for a contest, describing him as a bottle of wine, I'd say he was very palatable, formidable yet effervescent, vibrant, and dynamically complex. He hits all the right notes, simultaneously sweet and smoky, and so nuanced, even his undertones have undertones. He is best appreciated at room temperature, but aren't we all? And is here tonight to introduce us to two wines, which he promises will pair nicely with the pandemic. Steve, take it away.
Well, thank you. Welcome everybody. I thoroughly enjoy doing this. Why not have a cocktail party? And looks like almost everybody's outside. Al fresco dining, al fresco drinking is definitely a good thing. Yeah, thank you for that intro, Kathy. I'd say probably I'm the kind of wine you either love or hate, but nonetheless, I got into wine actually 20 some years ago, and it really was something that captured a lot of my interests. Food, obviously, travel, being social, things like that. It was a great mix of a lot of different things. And actually, as it turned out, probably the Rhone Valley, the wines that we'll be tasting today, was kind of really what inspired me, because this is an area that is really old. So I guess to start out, the Rhone, if you think of France, almost like a battle shield, the Rhone Valley is in the southeast corner. It follows a river, follows the Rhone River, and that has been used by humans for 2,000 plus years. In fact, where Kathy's background is in the northern Rhone, and there's a tiny little church in the background that a very famous hermit lived in, and the vineyards today are planted around that, and that region is called Hermitage. So it goes back to Greek times, followed by Roman times, followed by everybody else. So it's a really old region. It really was defined by that river. So the Rhone Valley is really separated into two different distinct regions. The northern Rhone is really, really rocky, very hard to get, very steep granite cliffs, not a lot of topsoil. And the grapes that grow, the primary red grape in the north is Syrah. And only about 5% of all of the wines from the Rhone Valley come from the northern Rhone. So most of them, 95%, come from the southern Rhone. The southern Rhone is similar. It's very rugged. The soil is pretty rocky, but it's a little flattened out. It's a little wider. It's a little warmer also. So the Rhone, the southern Rhone, is mostly defined by at least the red grape, Grenache. There are about 27, 28 different varietals that are grape varietals. And a varietal is kind of a unique grape, like an orange or a grapefruit is an individual fruit. Grapes are that way too. And so the primary red grape in the southern Rhone is Grenache. And Grenache is planted in fairly rugged soil, and I brought some rocks. So this is the French refer it translates to a rolled stone, but it's a river stone, and these rocks exist everywhere. I mean, it's hard to find soil, and in fact, a lot of the wines that, now I can't say that this is responsible for the quality of minerality in a wine, but there's a lot of minerals in the vineyard, evident minerals. So the southern Rhone, little warmer. Those stones actually help in extending ripening. They warm up during the day and they radiate heat at night, and that allows the grapes to continue ripening. It's a fairly challenging environment, aside from the fact of not a lot of good soil. There's a wind that blows down from the Massif Central, the mountains to the north, and it blows down at pretty ferocious rate. It'll strip grapes right off the vine. It blows so fast. It's called Le Mistral. So you got rocky soil. It's not very hospitable, and you got a wind that is unrelenting in some cases. So the grapes have to kind of work around that, and because of that challenge, we get some pretty nice wine. So I think we'll start. So in tasting wine, it's generally the preference to go white to red, light to heavy, dry to sweet. It allows your palate to kind of move from one step to the next. So we'll start out with this white. The winery that we're going to focus on is a winery run by a husband and wife, Tina and Michel Gassier. The Gassiers have been in the wine business their entire life. They are in that southern, actually. So if you think about the southeast quadrant of France, they're actually at the southern end of the Rhone Valley. So there's Vienne is the city in the northern part, and Avignon is the city in the south. And this is actually a little further south of Avignon. It's a region called Costières de Nîmes. There are, worth mentioning, within the Rhone Valley, there are about 23 growing appellations. So an appellation is a defined growing region. The French government will set the standards for that region. So there are 23 of them, where grapes are defined, growing conditions are defined, quality is defined, and that's actually kind of nice. So when you get a wine from France that has a specific name on it, you're getting a guarantee of quality. So this first wine comes from Costières de Nîmes in the southern end of France, at close to where the Gassiers winery is. It's a blend of 5 different grapes. Grenache Blanc, which is fairly acidic, gives some nice structure. There's a grape called Roussanne, which kind of gives texture and mouthfeel. Proportion-wise, 45% Grenache, 20% Roussanne, 20% Claret, 10% Viognier, and 5% Beurre Blanc. So they're outside of really Syrah and Grenache, and Viognier, many of the grapes are not very familiar to most wine drinkers, but they're sort of like spices in a spice cabinet. They make a great, when put together, they make a great composition. So let's taste this wine. It is, give it a little swirl. I probably should have mentioned it. If it's too cold, it may be like a little muted, so just warm it up a bit. Wants to be around 50, 55 degrees. Give it a nose. It has the wines of the Rhone usually, I mean, minerals. I mean, you smell almost a little like wet concrete or wet stone in the wine. Yeah, nice minerality, nice tree fruit. I'm a visual learner, so see if we can plate this. All right, so as a visual representation of kind of what I'm getting out of this wine, definitely honey. There is, the Viognier has almost a honeycomb quality. Little pear. Oftentimes with the Grenache Blanc, you taste sort of tangerine. Now instead of the fresh tangerine, I'm getting more of the kind of the mandarin orange that you get out of a can. It has a sweeter nose to it, almost I don't know, just it reminds me of my childhood. Maybe a little acid from star fruit. Asian pear, sort of if you've never had it, it's sort of kind of the cross between an apple and a pear in one fruit. And a little peach. Stone fruits really pop in these wines, and I mean, there's a lot going on. As it warms up, you kind of notice more flavors, but Rhone Valley whites, really food friendly. I mean, fairly affordable for what you're getting, although Viognier, there's one white made in the northern Rhone that is really expensive. It's very hard to make because people are basically tethered into the side of the hill to pick. There's no possible way of manually machine harvesting the fruit. but it's called Condrieu. It's Viognier, and it's unctuous, and it lasts forever, and it's spectacular. But for the most part, the Rhone whites, fairly inexpensive. Food pairings, they love things. I mean, if they're next to the water, so obviously, generally I would say more fresh. With trout is delicious with Rhone whites, but scallops, roasted chicken, things like that, lighter foods, really pair nicely with this. I guess I would say if anybody has any questions about this wine before we move to the next, we probably can take those if there are any.
Okay, and you guys, you can do that either in the chat, and or if you have a tasting note of your own, a comment of your own, you can either
Go ahead.
put it in the chat, or just raise your hand and I'll see you. I'm back in gallery view, so feel free to ask a question. And then if you think of one about the white wine when he's talking about the red wine, we can catch up later. But does anyone have anything to? Wait, Jack, hold on.
Muting. Okay.
Okay.
I just have one quick question, and it's about the specifics of the blends. They're very specific, but you're not going to be able to taste the wine until you're finished with the winemaking process. So is the percentages experimentation or experience, or both?
Both. So I should mention, so in the different grapes, I mean, the Rhone is, again, it's a river valley, and it's fairly interesting. I mean, on certain portions of the river, you'll find more gravelly soils. On others, you'll find more clay soils. So there are certain varietals that will favor a certain soil type, a certain orientation, a certain sun exposure. And while they are all obviously harvested in the same year, it doesn't necessarily mean that all the varietals are going to do well. Just like any other fruit, you know, the oranges might be great, but the lemons weren't as good, or whatever. So when it comes time to blending, I mean, it is, I can't even understand how a winemaker can taste a grape and know what it's going to be. I can't do that, but they can. And so normally for a blend, what they'll do is they'll harvest, you know, the Marsanne, the Roussanne, the Viognier, the Grenache Blanc, all of the different varietals, and then make independent judgments on those, and then decide, well, okay, so if Viognier had a really ripe year, you might want more of the Grenache Blanc, more acidic grape to balance out the Viognier. So it is, they will, I mean, it's hard enough just to make one or two, say, I mean, most wines are blends. The truth is most wines are not one varietal. It's hard to make a wine with 100% of one varietal. There are some exceptions, but for the most part, most wines are blends. In the United States, it only needs to be 75% of one grape to omit 25% others. So, but yeah, when they're blending, they'll have a massive conference table full of little beakers that all have fermented grape juice in it, and they will go and decide that, well, this one needs 46%. Nah, maybe it's 40. And then they'll blend a tiny little splash for themselves and decide whether that's what they want it to be. But yeah, I mean, generally in this part of the world, they're very formally trained, so they will go to enology school and learn, you know, kind of what flavors are going to show up during fermentation, what flavors are going to show up during aging, because it really is from the vineyard to the glass there are many influences that take place. I hope that was sort of rambling. I hope that answered the question.
We have a couple of questions from the chat. Are French varietals called by name like Cabernet Sauvignon, or just white Rhone wine?
So they are treated as individual varietals, but no, they are more often, and this is true for most of the old world. I mean, France, Spain, Portugal, the wines will be named after a place and not so much after the varietal. I mean, again, the vineyard behind Kathy is a really old Syrah vineyard. I mean, I can see that, and I can in my mind I can taste what that Hermitage tastes like. It's black plum and cherry with lots of black and white pepper mixed in, and minerals, lots of minerals, maybe a little mint. But it wouldn't be sold as, in France certainly, it wouldn't be sold as Syrah. It would be sold as Hermitage, and they would know that that's what it is. So yeah, it really, I want to say that it probably went back to probably the early 80s maybe, because initially, wine list, if you went to a restaurant in the United States, the wine list was probably French, Italian, maybe some California, but not much. And so you were having to order wines from a place that you might not be familiar with. And I think in marketing to the American audience, they thought, you know what, in Bordeaux, you on the right bank of Bordeaux, they only grow, or they primarily, the wine is dominated by Merlot. On the left bank, it's dominated by Cabernet. That's a lot to ask the consumer to know, so we'll just say it's a Bordeaux blend. It's mostly Cab. It's mostly Merlot. And so that it really is, I think it evolved in just, it was easier for the consumer because Americans are not the greatest at geography in general. So
from Susan, and this is the disclaimer Geek Alert question here. How does this compare to the minerality of the Sauv Blancs from Marlborough, New Zealand?
The Sauvignon Blanc from New Zealand it's actually, so the subsoil or the base layer of New Zealand is primarily a rock called greywacke. It looks like blue slate, and so there definitely is a minerality attached to Sauvignon Blanc from New Zealand. I would say though, in the case of New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc, probably what grabs people's attention is they're sulfur compounds called thiols, and they mimic things that we're very familiar with. And New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc typically has two thiols, very dominant. One thiol smells just like grapefruit. Sometimes it's white, sometimes it's ruby red. The other thiol smells like passion fruit, which is, it's just really, really tart, acidic, bright, tropical flavors. The minerality is probably more a combination of thiols. I mean, just what pops on that, but yeah, no, there's a region in France in the Loire Valley called Sancerre. And when I was learning wine years ago, my mentor said, Sancerre, it's crushed oyster shells with lemon juice, and that was just the essence of that. It was minerals and acid, and so I would say in the Rhone Valley, just because it's certainly warmer than New Zealand, or ripens more fully than New Zealand, that you're getting more. New Zealand probably has the acid pops more, which I think is more, brings the minerals maybe more to a head. But in this case, it, like I said, if you pour water on concrete or a rock, it's more of a sort of a smell in the background, like wet concrete. It's not, New Zealand's more dominant. This is, I think, more subtle. Was that good? I did kind of swerved around, but
No, that's good. We have
We are
one more on the, oh, totally, she says. When blending, are the wines of the same vintage?
yes, in most cases. They are not required to use 100% of a vintage in all regions. All regions have different restrictions. I want to say that in the United States, it's 95%. So it's almost everything has to be, for it to be a vintage wine, it has to be 95% from that same vintage. But non-vintage wines are, I mean, there's absolutely nothing wrong with the non-vintage wine. Well, unless it happens to be really old and you can't tell how old it is until you open it up and discover it's prune juice. But outside of that, non-vintage wines, I mean, it really is. Champagne is often made in a non-vintage style where to maintain a house style, they will select 5 or 6 years of wine to blend together to maintain that, and then they'll add the new vintage in. But yes, in this case, this is all 2017 fruit.
Thank you. Great questions, everybody. Okay, that's it. That's it for the white, Steve.
All right. Well, let's move on to the red. All right. So the red, Michel Gassier. So the Gassiers have actually several different projects. The Michel and Tina is actually a different project than Domaine Gassier. The Domaine Gassier, which was the Notre Pays, is more maybe a tier above the Michel and Tina Gassier. But this is mostly Grenache again. The breakdown on this is 65 Grenache, 25 Syrah, and 10% Mourvèdre, or Monastrell if in Spain. It is, it spent, I think about 8 months in concrete tanks, so it did not see any oak. It is, again, 2017 from that vintage. Now this one, whereas the white came specifically from Costières-de-Nîmes in the far south, this is actually split about 50-50, right side, left side. So 50% of the wine, I mean, comes from Rhone Valley vineyards that are red clay, iron-rich red clay dominant, versus like mineral deposit, calcareous, fossilized sea sediment, white, I mean, almost white clay on the opposite side. So they split it about 50-50 because the grapes, you kind of want to get grapes to struggle. I mean, that's what makes this region so wonderful. It forces them to struggle. There's nothing easy about this area. And so when they do struggle, they produce better fruit. So let's give a little taste on this guy. All right. So, and I should say, if you taste things in the wine that I don't mention, just understand that is absolutely accurate for you. Wine notes are sort of poetry a little bit, because in this group, not a single one of us has the same palate. Not a single one of us has the same life experience, preferences, food tastes, whatever. They're all different. Now, I would argue that an orange should probably taste like an orange that everybody else can decide is an orange. But within that, whether you taste orange or not is really just what you're tasting. some of the flavors, as I said, some of the flavors that are captured in the wine are related to the grapes. Grenache, which this is dominant. Grenache has a lot of red fruits in it. Red fruits like red plum, red cherry, raspberry, sometimes a little rhubarb, strawberry certainly. And those flavors are just part of, that's what Grenache smells and tastes like. Syrah likes a little more black fruit, so it's blackberry, black plum. But so if you don't get these things, it is your palate, is, you know, you're in the driver's seat. But as a visual representation of kind of this style of wine. So hopefully people can see that. So red plum, black plum. Oftentimes people will reference purple flowers. In this case, lavender, but lilac is also part of that purple flower family. Blackberries. Blue fruits, every once in a while, there are a few wines that will show blue fruits, like blueberries or boysenberries. Not a lot. There are only a handful that really are kind of known for that flavor. But the next things are kind of what make the Rhone the Rhone. You know, it's rugged kind of nature is captured by kind of the herbal notes. So even on this label, you can see rosemary. That is very much a profile of Rhone wines. So there's a savory nature. It's kind of rosemary, some thyme, some black pepper, and mint sometimes. But the nice thing about those is that in that wine, and I would say this is true for a lot of European wines, old world wines. Every wine from the old world has a food that it's supposed to go with. It's rare in the old world that they sit down and just drink wine to drink wine. I mean, they do that too, but it's usually with food. And one of the things that got me into wine initially was the crazy food friendliness of just a bottle like this. It's got fruit. It's got, you know, kind of a savoriness. You put this with, in the Rhone, lamb is a big thing. So if you put this with a lamb chop, herb drubbed, it just doesn't get any better. So as a very kind of utilitarian wine, this is it. I mean, you've got all the flavors you need to complement your food in a glass.
Thank you. All right.
We lost sound.
Oh, gotcha. Am I back?
Now you're back. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So there's
That last little bit.
okay. So there's the value driven nature of these wines. I mean, there's a lot of wine made. I should say for a growing region in France, the Rhone Valley produces like 400 million bottles a year. They make a lot of wine. It's only second to Bordeaux. But when I was getting into wine, the bottle that really captured my palate was a wine called Parallel 45. And in fact, the vineyard behind Kathy, I believe, is owned by the winery that makes Parallel 45. It's a producer called Paul Jabelet Anet. And Parallel 45 was maybe $10. And you'd put that up against a whole lot of other wines, maybe at 2 or 3 times that price, and they just weren't as compelling. But No, I think the Rhone wines are definitely worth people's attention.
So you talked about food pairing. Can you recommend foods to pair this one with?
Yeah, no, this I mean, if you eat meat, anything meaty, lamb is I mean, somebody explained to me that there are only you know, certain agricultural products that can coexist in this area just because there's, you know, the soil. The soil looks like that. And so if there's no soil there, you're kind of limited by what you can grow. Well, sheep will go wherever they need to find little things poking up through all this stuff. So they'll go and find it. So there's probably, it's in as long as I've loved wine and food. I don't think that I've ever found a rule that is better for food pairing, that things that grow together go together. And so lamb would be my first choice. But sheep's milk cheeses actually are wonderful with that. They barbecue actually is delicious. It needs a little more, I mean, for a barbecue wine, you want to maybe a touch more Syrah, just because Syrah is a little more unctuous, a little more, can kind of force its way through that the wood smoke. But yeah, this is, I mean, vegetables actually. So as we, you know, we talked about all the different herbs. I mean, you throw this in with eggplant and some onions and tomatoes and zucchini, and you got ratatouille, and that is amazing with Rhone wines. If you're in Paris, oftentimes the house pour at a restaurant will be a Rhone wine. I mean, if you don't order a specific varietal, they may just pour you something like this, and you're gonna love it because it'll drink beautifully. But yeah, anything that has some herbal component to it is gonna like it.
Okay, we've got a question from Susan again. Any common dessert wines from the Rhone?
Yes, but not common, and unfortunately not inexpensive. There are some late harvest. There's some late harvest wines, both red and white, that are absolutely delicious. Admittedly, the challenge for a lot of late harvest wines is climate change. It's not as easy to get the optimal ripeness without rot. In Germany, for example, famous for their dessert wines, it's harder and harder for those wines to be made properly because it's always been a standard that you can't have overripe or moldy or rotten grapes unless actually there's an asterisk, unless it's a specific type of mold that is favored for making certain dessert wines. But in most cases, if the grapes overripen or start to raisinate, they're not usable. And so it's been harder and harder to make dessert wines around the world. Yeah, Banyuls is a red wine, and I'm trying to think. There's a
what is it about the terroir?
I'm sorry.
Oh, no, I was just unmuting them because Craig has the next question.
Oh yeah, no.
I'm muting the Penslers again. Look, finish up.
Oh no, that's pretty much.
Okay,
Yeah.
All right. Let's try that again, Craig. Sorry.
Cindy
Hey,
was
man.
trying to frame my question a little more eloquently.
Yeah.
No, we've been there, Steve, and we went to Châteauneuf-du-Pape, which, where is that geographically compared to where, I mean, I know it's on the Rhone,
Yes,
but it
northern.
seems like they were so proud of their Châteauneuf-du-Pape. and that whole silliness and the unbelievable pepper and all
Yeah.
those.
Yes.
You know, but we drove into that vineyard and it was like driving into a gravel quarry.
Yeah.
I mean, you couldn't see dirt anywhere. All you saw was those river rock that you had on your plate.
Yeah.
Just miles of them, fields of them. It was crazy.
Yeah.
So is Avignon, I mean, where is it compared to where we are here? And how does that whole terroir compare to
What makes
Well,
it so
to the
different?
Rhone?
What makes it so different? What makes the price of the wine go up like 4 times?
Yeah.
Across the river.
Sure. So Châteauneuf-du-Pape, the castle of the Pope. I want to say it was like the 4th century. Don't hold me to that, but I think it was I think it was around the 4th century. The Pope. Yeah, 4th century. The Pope decided to create a summer palace. He actually was a big fan of wine, loved wine. So he decided that he was going to take, he used the river again. You know, a lot of great advancements in human civilization have been around bodies of water. But he decided to summer in near Avignon and created a palace, a castle. And instructed that it be planted with vineyards. And to this day, it's a very small region, relatively speaking. There are only 13, last they reviewed it, but there are only 13 grape varietals that are permissible in the blend. It's Grenache, again, Grenache dominant. But it is, yeah, there's Craig, as you said, there's a sense of place. I mean, there's a French term called terroir, and it basically means the taste of place. So, and it's a fairly it's sometimes hard to define, other times not. I mean, but the Rhone Valley, Châteauneuf-du-Pape, yeah, it's like roasted plums and pepper. And they age forever. I've got Châteauneuf in my cellar from the 70s that is still drinking well. It was really what makes it expensive is that it's a small region. They don't make a lot of it. The standards are really, really high. You cannot, I mean, for example, if you're growing grapes there, you can't allow your vines to produce as much fruit as they might want to. You have to curtail the yield to maintain the quality. So there are all sorts of rules and regulations that require that are required of producers from Châteauneuf. Now, I will say the best part is when you can find because it, you know, at every, as an architect, you know that every property has a limit to the property, and if you can find the piece of dirt that sits literally inches from the other from Châteauneuf-du-Pape, you can get some pretty good wine. You know.
Well, we went to Beaucastel, or Beaucastel, however he pronounces it.
Yeah.
They have a second that they sell that is essentially across the county line.
Yeah.
I mean, literally, it's a continual vineyard that you can't tell looking at it that it changes. But there's a property line right down the middle, and on this side, it was $100 a bottle, and on this side, it was $25 a bottle.
Right.
And the wine was the same wine. So you can find that.
No, we always
I don't think
look.
you can find them in the U.S. very much, but.
We're always looking to find the neighbors of the rock stars. You know, like what's the B stock on this, and then is it really going to make a difference? I mean, I don't think the grapes. I mean, now in fairness, there are vineyards, and in fact, the Gassiers have vineyards where they'll do they'll get a backhoe and dig out a pit, and there are, I mean, it 5 or 6 different soils that are visible. Like, you don't need to be a geologist to know that whatever's there's a lot of different stuff. I mean, you can see it stratified layers. And so it is possible that, you know, across the street or even 10 feet from, you know, one vineyard, it's going to be different. It's possible. But I don't think the grapes know that humans have decided that this is the boundary for Chateauneuf, and it can't ever, I mean, because they do change it every once in a while. They will make adjustments. And that's a very human thing. So I don't know if the grapes know, but no, Chateauneuf is wonderful. Amazing food wine.
Okay, we've got another question. It's from Don and Diane Lowe. California, Oregon, and Washington are smoky, impacting this year's wine. What kind of year is France having?
Actually, I don't know. I have not, I honestly don't know what vintage reports are showing up. I would say, I mean, yes, California, Washington, Oregon are in an awful place right now. I think for a lot of reasons, they probably should not make any wine in 2020. Nobody wants 2020 on a bottle. They want to forget 2020. And in fact, a lot of the 2020 wines, I think, from that region are going to be probably, many of them may end up being undrinkable because the fires have hit before. I mean, we've had fires in the Northwest since 2017. I mean, 2017 was a raging fire, 2018 was a raging fire, 2019 was a raging fire, and 2020 is capping off all that. The difference this year is the fires in the United States started really about a month before normal fire season begins. And so in previous years, harvest might have already occurred. The wines were in a tank. So if they got smoke taint, that would be surprising. This year, though, a lot of those grapes are still in the vineyard and will have smoke taint. But I don't know for Europe. I would say in general, with respect to so-called vintage reviews, it's sort of, I mean, you can say if all of Champagne, for example, gets hit with hail, that vintage, it doesn't matter. It's probably going to be not that great. Or a late frost, wipes out parts of Burgundy. The reality, though, if you think about your yard versus your neighbor's yard, they probably don't look identical. You might have a tree that provides more shade that causes, there's so many little independent variables when it comes to making a vintage review that saying that, all of Lawrence does not encounter the identical, not similar, but identical growing season as everybody else has. There's so many things. Well, I fertilized and watered, you didn't, or whatever. So what we tend to say with vintages is worry less about the vintage and more about the producer, because in challenging years, good winemakers just make less wine. They still make wine and it's still good. They just don't make as much of it. It's kind of like, a good CEO should be able to navigate the bad times as well as the good times. And that's kind of what the winemaker does. So vintage reviews are, as an example, years and years ago, when I was selling wine, I did sell the 1998 vintage. And 98 came on the heels of 95, 6, and 7, which were all pretty good. 94, actually, 94, 5, 6, and 7. And so when 98 came and people tried the wines, they're like, this is awful. Well, fast forward to now. Some of the famous 97s, not all, but some of them have kind of fallen off a cliff. This would be for Napa Valley. But 98s, I just got an offering for 98s, some library release from a famous producer. They sold out in about 30 seconds. Like as soon as the email went out, people snatched up all of the 98s. Now you couldn't give these away when they were released at normal price in the store. In fact, they were closing them out. But as it turned out, they aged really, really, really well. And today they're more collectible than the 97. So with respect to vintages, it's the producer is probably more in control of anything than the weather.
Good, thank you. Anybody else have a question? You can literally raise your hand at this point or just send something in a chat. But I will see you with your hand up. And I mean, literally, you don't have to do it with the little icon. Do you want to tell us why you chew your wine when you taste? You're not.
Oh, yeah.
You're not
Well,
tasting like I am.
Yeah, no, so in tasting wine, years ago, and I will say, before I completely dump on the producer of these glasses, there's an Austrian wine glass producer named Riedel, and they make great glasses, beautiful glasses. But their premise is that that you need a glass to position wine in your mouth at a certain point to accentuate certain flavors. So they will sell you a Chardonnay glass and a Pinot Noir glass and a Cabernet glass and an old Chardonnay glass and they have 30 or 40 different glasses that they will sell. They all hold liquid, and the wine doesn't really know what it is. It's just wine. But they're based on what has been disproved since like the 70s, that the tongue is mapped out, like sweet on the tip and bitter on the sides and salty in the middle or something like that. Well, they proved this in the 70s that it was completely false by actually having people who did not have a tongue do taste tests. And lo and behold, they could taste just as much as somebody with a complete tongue. So it's when you chew food, you're kind of washing the entire mouth, because there are taste buds in your tongue, there are taste buds in the back of your throat, and there are taste buds in the upper part of kind of the retronasal cavity. So when you chew your food, you're kind of pushing it all around, and that makes it taste better. And so I always chew my wine for that reason. I've never mapped out my tongue. I just know that it's completely random, and I want to make sure I cover all my bases.
Good answer. Okay, Shelley wants to know, how many grape growers are actually the wine producers?
Sadly, a whole lot less than they used to be. Originally, if you want to go back to, early times, winemaking was pretty much just the farmer's way of saving produce. It really was just, I grew this stuff and I'm not throwing it away. And so you would ferment it and it would age, and it would endure. I will say that, and so initially wineries started out that way, where you just grew grapes. You didn't even know what you were growing in some cases. There's a term that's used today called field blend. A field blend means like, you got no idea maybe today through DNA testing, they figured out what it is. But, if you were growing grapes in Italy, your grandma brought you a cutting and you planted it, and the guy down the street gave you a cutting, you planted it, and some wayward traveler brought in a cutting and you planted it, and it's just, you'd harvest it all at once and you'd make wine. Over time, that the kind of the skill set required to growing grapes is different than winemaking. And so I would say today, a lot of the winemakers I know are very actively involved in vineyard management, but in California, for example, there are entire industries dedicated to vineyard management, where if you have a checkbook, you can hire a company that will make sure that your grapes are perfectly ripe when they show up at your crush pad in your winery. But I would say, there are a lot more corporate wines these days, and where who grows the grapes doesn't even matter. It's just they have a chemical engineer that will adjust it to however the recipe needs to be.
Okay.
But no, I would say that I mean that's I think the challenge for, I mean, in locally, that is one of the challenges for local wines. I mean, because there really is a different skill set in growing grapes and making wine. 'Cause wine is, I mean, unless you're using very controlled stuff, like if you buy a winemaking kit, most of the variables have been dialed out. They know that the yeast is going to ferment in a predictable way and it's going to taste a certain way. If you're harvesting grapes and crushing those grapes and fermenting those grapes, there's a lot of science. I mean, my father's a chemist, and I would never ever want to be a winemaker. I just don't have the I don't have the patience and the aptitude to deal with all of the little tiny, like, well, there's a microbe that's now causing the yeast to not ferment at the right temperature or whatever. But I would say, back to the original question, I would say many quality growers, small producers are active in both areas.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other questions from the crowd? I can't see half of you, but well, I thought the wines were very good. How about you guys? I mean, thumbs
Nice.
up. Yeah, yeah. I thought you made two really excellent choices. And I'm going to start unmuting people so we can give you a round of applause.
Yeah, me too.
And I also really appreciated the visual aids.
Yeah,
You know,
well,
because
I'm a visual learner.
So where's next month?
Where are we going next month?
we don't know, but I'm going to tell you, we're going to let our speaker choose. We don't know who that person is yet, but it's always going to be on the third Thursday of the month at 5 p.m. So you will get, I'm trying to unmute everybody. I'm multitasking, people. It's not going well.
I think I've got it.
Okay. Yeah, so we'll invite different speakers, wine experts, and we're going to let them choose, and then you'll get a notice about what region and, you know, what the wines are, so you can
we're going in video.
sample along. And and anyway, Steve, we really appreciate it. Such a
I'm not
great
paying attention.
presentation, delicious
I'm
wines.
supposed to say thank you at this point.
So I'm gonna thank you as we finish our meals. Oh, tell us about City Wine Market.
Oh, yeah.
You want to tell us about City Wine Market?
Shameless plug, absolutely. So my business partner and I, my business partner is Jamie. We're the only two employees you'll ever encounter, but we've
Incredible.
spent a long time in wine and fine dining, and
Greg's talking.
we kind of we taste most of what shows up on our shelves before it does. We're pretty particular about quality that we're looking for at various price points, but hopefully we've got a new tasting room that's about, I mean, almost done. It won't be used, but at some point we hope to be able to do tastings in the store, maybe with a wine maker, Zoom in to join us. But we're I would say, you know, one final thing I would say that, you know, I was talking with a friend of mine who's a communication specialist. She was saying, you know, really the whole idea, the whole phrase of social distance or social distancing is really a bad thing, in the sense that we are social beings, and distancing is really not a good health decision. Physical distancing at this point, definitely an important thing. Social distancing, not a good thing. So more of stuff like this is whatever has to be done until things get back to normal. is crucial. So to all of you, be well and stay well, stay happy, and come see us if you need some cocktails.
Or
Thank
if
you
you
so
ever have
much.
anything crazy and you want a wine mix, ask Steve and he'll pair you up perfectly.
And
Well, I
is this
haven't.
recorded? This
Yes.
is recorded and will
Yes.
repeat it.
Yeah, I'll send you the link, the YouTube link here probably tomorrow.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Hi,
so it takes
Bonnie.
us a little while to process it and get it up on YouTube, and then you'll get the follow-up so you can watch it again. I do notice your faces looks a little bit more mellow than they did an hour ago. And this would be the point where I would say, all right,
No
Drive-
driving.
no driving, call an Uber. But the upside of the pandemic is we're already home.
That's
So thank you so much. Thank
Yeah,
you,
thank
Steve. Thank you, everybody, for coming.
well.
Thank you.
Enjoy your night. I still have
Thank
wine.
Thank you.
So
Thanks, Kathy. Thanks,
You bet.
Kathleen.
Yeah,
Thanks,
thank
Steve.
you
Thanks,
bet.
Steve.
See you guys.